I'm 61 and I avoid people now. The peace I found will surprise you. Some mornings I stand by the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the light crawl slowly across the yard. The world feels still in those early hours, and for a moment I'm not 61 years old. I'm simply a soul taking in the quiet gift of a new day. There's a kind of peace in that silence that I never knew to treasure when I was younger. It wasn't always like this. My life used to be a constant blur of faces, voices, and obligations. I thought the measure of a good life was how many people you could fit around your table, how many friends you could name off the top of your head. But the truth is, somewhere along the way I started losing pieces of myself in the noise. These days I'm far more careful with my time. It's not that I dislike people. It's not bitterness. It's clarity. I've learned that not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay, and not every conversation is worth the energy it takes to have it. At 61, I've discovered that my soul is lighter when I'm not carrying the weight of others' drama, opinions, or expectations. There's a freedom in simply being without having to perform, explain, or please. And that freedom tastes sweeter than any crowded room or shallow laughter ever could. So, I avoid people now. Not because I've closed my heart, but because I've opened my eyes. I want the moments I have left to be real, to be deep, to be filled with what matters. And sometimes that means choosing the company of my own thoughts over the clamor of the world. Because in the stillness I've found something I never had before myself. And that has made all the difference. Number 1. I stopped chasing shallow connections. When I was younger, I thought more was always better. More friends, more parties, more invitations, more people knowing my name. My phone used to light up with texts and calls, and I wore my busyness like a badge of honor. But as the years passed, I began to see the cracks in that illusion. Many of those connections were built on convenience, not commitment. We knew each other's faces, but not each other's souls. I can remember standing in a crowded room once, the air buzzing with small talk, and realizing I felt completely alone. It wasn't that anyone was unkind. They were smiling, laughing, making conversation. But the words were weightless. We talked about the weather, television shows, sports scores, anything but what truly mattered. And in that moment I realized I was starving for something deeper. Shallow connections take up time without nourishing the heart. They leave you drained, like eating empty calories when your body is craving real food. I spent years saying yes to everything, afraid that saying no would make me seem distant or unfriendly. But the truth was, I was trading my peace for noise, my energy for interactions that didn't feed my spirit. So I stopped chasing. I stopped forcing myself to attend events I didn't care about. I stopped texting people who never reached out unless they needed something. I stopped believing that my worth was tied to the number of people I could call friend. What happened next was surprising. My circle became smaller, but my heart became fuller. I began to have real conversations, the kind where you talk about your dreams, your fears, your faith, and your regrets, without feeling judged. I started noticing how much lighter I felt when I spent time with people who truly knew me and wanted the best for me. Now, I don't measure friendship by the size of my contact list. I measure it by the depth of our connection. I'd rather have 3 people who understand my heart than 30 who barely remember my birth. The joy of no longer chasing shallow connections is that the ones who remain are the ones who matter, and they are worth every second of my time. Number 2, I learned the cost of emotional draining people. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. The heaviness that comes from being around people who drain you emotionally. I used to think it was my job to be there for everyone, no matter what. I'd listen for hours to complaints, carry burdens that weren't mine, and try to keep the peace in situations where my peace was the only thing at risk. It took me years to realize that constantly giving without receiving is not kindness. It's self-neglect. Emotional vampires don't always mean harm. Some are simply trapped in cycles of negativity, drama, or self-pity. But if you let them, they will pull you into those cycles until you're just as weary as they are. I began to notice the signs. I'd dread certain phone calls because I knew they'd leave me frustrated or sad. I'd leave gatherings feeling tense instead of uplifted. I'd replay conversations in my head, wishing I'd said less, given less, been less available. And in those moments I understood my mental and emotional health mattered too. So I started setting boundaries. I learned to say, "I'm sorry, I can't talk right now," without guilt. I stepped back from people who saw my empathy as an endless resource they could tap into without ever refilling it. I stopped trying to rescue those who didn't actually want to change. And something shifted. The more space I created between myself and emotional drain, the more I noticed my energy returning. I had more patience for the people I loved. I had more creativity, more laughter, I realized that being selective with my emotional investment didn't make me selfish, it made me wise. There's a peace that comes from surrounding yourself with people who bring joy instead of chaos, who uplift instead of deplete. At 61, I don't have the time or the strength to waste on relationships that leave me empty. I want to spend what I have left on connections that make me feel alive, understood, and at peace. Because in the end, life is too short to give the best of yourself to those who only take. Number 3, time became too precious to waste. There's a strange shift that happens when you cross into your 60s. You begin to feel time differently. In your 20s, you imagine you have endless years ahead. In your 40s, you start to see the edges of the horizon. But at 61, you don't just see the horizon. You feel it. Every hour, every day, every season becomes a choice. I no longer live like time is an infinite resource. I see it for what it is, a fragile currency I can't afford to spend carelessly. And once you realize that, you stop giving it away to things and people that don't matter. When I was younger, I used to say yes to plans I didn't want, events I didn't enjoy, and conversations I didn't value. I did it to be polite. I did it because I didn't want to hurt anyone's feeling. But now I understand. Every yes to something meaningless is a no to something that matters. So I became more intentional. I spend my mornings the way I love: slow coffee, a quiet prayer, the sun warming my face. I choose dinners with people who make me laugh over large gatherings where I'm just another face in the crowd. I take walks. I garden. I read books that feed my soul. I no longer feel guilty for protecting my hours. I no longer feel obligated to fill my calendar just to feel busy. My time is too valuable to waste on relationships that go nowhere, on people who drain rather than give, on obligations that rob me of joy. At this stage in life, I don't measure a day's success by how much I accomplished on paper. I measure it by how present I felt, how deeply I loved, and how much peace I carried in my heart. And the truth is, the more I guard my time, the richer my life becomes. Number 4, I found the freedom to be myself. One of the most beautiful gifts of age is that the need to impress fades away. I spent decades trying to mold myself into what others expected: softer here, quieter there, more agreeable, less opinionated. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to belong. But somewhere along the way, I realized that belonging at the cost of yourself isn't belonging at all. It's performance. And I was tired of performing. When I started stepping back from certain people, I also stepped away from the unspoken rules of who I should be. I no longer felt the pressure to wear a mask at every interaction. I didn't have to pretend to be interested in gossip or fake a laugh at jokes that weren't funny. I could say what I truly thought or say nothing at all, without worrying about fitting in. There's an incredible lightness in living authentically. I wear the clothes I love, even if they're not in style. I speak my mind with kindness but without apology. I spend my free time on what fills me, not on what looks impressive to others. And in doing so, I've attracted people who value me for exactly who I am, not who I pretend to be. When you stop molding yourself to please everyone else, you find out something remarkable. The right people still love you, and the wrong people simply drift away. And that's not a loss, it's a gift. At 61, I've never felt freer. I am unapologetically myself, and that has brought me more peace than any crowded room or false approval ever could. I no longer fear losing people, I fear losing myself. And that fear keeps me honest, grounded, and exactly where I'm meant to be. Number 5. I discovered the beauty of quiet. There's a certain magic in a quiet morning. The world's still half asleep. The air cool and soft. The only sounds the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional bird outside. I didn't notice these things in my younger years. I was too busy rushing out the door, chasing schedules, filling every spare moment with something or someone. But when you remove the constant stream of people, invitations and obligations, you start to hear things you'd forgotten how to hear. The whisper of your own thoughts, the rhythm of your breathing, the way the wind sounds as it moves through the trees. Quiet isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of something sacred. I used to mistake silence for loneliness. Now I see it as a companion. Quiet has taught me to listen better, not only to others but to myself. I've noticed that when life slows down, when I'm not scrambling to keep up with everyone else's pace, I make better decisions. My mind is clearer, my heart is calmer. There's a beauty in moments where nothing is happening, at least by the world's standards. Sitting in a chair by the window, drinking tea in the afternoon light, watching the shadows grow long on the lawn. These aren't wasted moments. They're the richest ones. The world constantly tells us to be louder, faster, more visible. But in the quiet, I've learned that life's most important truths are whispered, not shouted, and when you finally hear them, you realize you never needed the noise in the first place. Number 6. I realized solitude is not loneliness. For a long time, I believed that being alone meant something was wrong. If I spent a Friday night by myself, I felt like I was missing out. If I went to lunch without company, I thought people might pity me. But over time, I began to understand that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing at all. Loneliness is a feeling of emptiness, of longing for connection you can't seem to find. Solitude, on the other hand, is a choice, a space you step into willingly because it gives you something the crowd never could. In solitude, I've discovered parts of myself that I didn't know were there. I've remembered old dreams. I've faced truths I used to bury under busyness. I've had conversations with God that I might have missed if I was surrounded by noise. There's a peace in knowing that your happiness isn't dependent on someone else's presence. I can spend an afternoon reading, an evening walking, a Sunday cooking a meal for one, and feel full, not empty. I'm not waiting for someone to join me before I live my life. I'm already living it. The irony is, once you find comfort in solitude, you become better in relationships too. You no longer cling out of fear or fill the air with meaningless words just to avoid silence. You connect because you want to, not because you're desperate not to be alone. At 61, I've learned that solitude is not a void. It's a sanctuary, and the more time I spend there, the more whole I become. Number 7. I choose depth over quantity. When I look back at the way I lived in my earlier decades, I see a woman surrounded by people yet starving for connection. My social calendar used to be packed. Dinners, parties, group outings, and I thought that meant I was rich in friendships. But many of those interactions were wide but shallow, full of chatter yet empty of meaning. Now my relationships look completely different. My circle is small, so small I could count them on one hand. But the depth of those connections is immeasurable. These are people who truly know me, who have seen me on my best days and my worst, who understand the tone of my voice without me explaining a thing, who can sit in silence with me and make it feel like a conversation. Choosing depth over quantity has changed the way I spend my time. I no longer stretch myself thin to keep in touch with dozens of acquaintances just so I can feel socially relevant. Instead, I invest in the few relationships that nourish me, and I nourish them back. It's in the deep conversations over coffee, the unplanned visits just to check in, the shared laughter over something only we would find funny. It's knowing someone will answer your call at midnight because they care, not because they feel obligated. It's in the trust that builds quietly over years, not weeks. Some people think this kind of pruning is sad, that you lose too much when you let go of so many. But I've found the opposite to be true. By letting go of the many, I have more to give to the few, and in return I receive something far more valuable than numbers. Loyalty, truth, and love that doesn't waver. At this stage of life, I don't need a room full of people. I just need a table with a few good souls around it. People who would rather sit in my kitchen talking about life than pose for pictures to prove we were having fun. It's not about being popular anymore. It's about being known. Truly deeply known, and still loved anyway. Conclusion: the peace of living on my own terms. When I say I avoid people now, some think it's sadness speaking, but it's not. It's wisdom. It's the quiet realization that life is too short to be lived for other people's approval. I have learned that my peace is precious. My time is sacred. My energy is not limitless. And I choose to spend all three with intention. The world will always tell you to be more, do more, see more. But I've found my joy in doing less, in seeing fewer, in being fully present for the moments that truly matter. Standing on my porch at sunrise, coffee in hand, I no longer feel the tug of fear that I might be missing out, because I know the truth. I'm not missing a thing. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And if that means my life is quieter, simpler, and smaller than it once was, then so be it. Because in this season I've learned that a quiet life lived well is far richer than a busy one lived for show, and I wouldn't trade that peace for anything.